Hey YouTube, welcome back to the Fantasy Football Profits. As always, we thank you guys so much for being here. Let's get right into it and talk about fake sleepers. We decided to do this video because there's a lot of noise out there. There are countless fantasy football sites, and I'm sure that left and right you're hearing a lot of hype on guys. Hype is what we love. We hate to hate on guys. We don't want to. They're not post about this guy's gonna suck. As far as much as there's this guy's gonna break out, he's gonna have a great season, and we hear a lot of contradicting information. I think just about every player in the league has been named a sleeper by someone. I feel like that's how it is. So we don't like to go on other people's sites. We don't really care what other people are saying, but we sat down and each of us selected 3 sleepers from other sites, and we're going to tell you why they're not going to be good this year. And basically, it's just simply to kind of avoid the hype on some people that other channels are excited about, but we have some information that says, you know, that's probably not going to happen. They're probably not going to break out. Granted, not everyone can be a sleeper every year. So, Rob, why don't you define what a sleeper is?
Yeah, so I don't want to give my definition of sleeper. So here's what I did. I went to the largest reputable YouTube fantasy football site out there, and they did a video, and we took their definition of sleepers, and here's how they defined a sleeper this way. They defined a sleeper running back as a player drafted outside of the first 5 rounds and the first 24 running backs taken in a 12-team draft, and they need to finish in the top 12 in terms of scoring at the end of the year. As far as wide receivers go, they say it this way. A player drafted outside the first 5 rounds, top 24 wide receivers taken in a 12-team draft that can finish in the top 12 in wide receiver scoring. And as far as quarterbacks go, they say a player drafted outside the first 5 rounds and 16 quarterbacks taken in 12-team drafts that's going to finish in the top 10 in quarterback points. And as far as tight ends go, here's how they define a sleeper tight end. Player drafted outside the first 5 rounds, outside the top 12 tight ends taken in 12-team drafts that will finish in the top 6 for tight ends. So we kind of took their definition. Now, I think it's important when we talk about fake sleepers. These aren't guys that we are just pegging fake sleepers, but we actually went to other sites, many other sites actually. I think I did a research of about 10 to 12 out there, and I found some names that were repeatedly coming up, and so those are the guys that we're going to talk about today.
Exactly. Well, unless you guys have anything more to say, I mean, we might as well not waste any time. We can just get right into our guys.
Okay.
All right, so I've got the first guy, and this is Austin Ekeler. Last year, people started to get a little bit excited about him, and this offseason, that excitement only grew. I think a lot of people think that Melvin Gordon isn't a great fantasy option, and because the Chargers let Brandon Oliver go, that maybe this is the year that Austin Ekeler could step up. He's known for being a good receiving back, and I think that a lot of people think he could have some good value. Well, first of all, let's just talk about his size. At 5'10", 200 pounds, he's very poor size for a running back. He's not going to be an effective runner. This is compounded by the fact that he had 2 fumbles on only 47 carries last year. Now, for him to break out and to have a good year as a fantasy running back, most guys, he's going to need about 200 carries. That 2 fumbles to 47 carries estimates to 8.5 fumbles for every 200 carries he gets. So if he does that, if he really struggles that much, they're not going to let him get to 200 carries if he continues that fumbling. That's because he's undersized and he's not a good build for a running back. So I think that that's a big concern for him. Now, he absolutely could do it in the passing game, but I don't think that he will, and here's why. Melvin Gordon is extremely underrated. This offseason, there have been reports that he's got one of the best hands in the NFL. He's been working with LaDainian Tomlinson, and I think that he's starting to break that hype down, or break down that kind of hate from when he first came in the league as a guy who was known for not being able to catch out of the backfield. But he's been slowly working on it for years now. This isn't just the first year that he's done it. He's had an increase in receptions, targets, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns all 3 seasons he's been in the league. He had 33 catches, up to 41, up to 58 catches last year, which is really starting to get up there. I believe he had 1 more catch than Todd Gurley had even. He had 0 receiving touchdowns, 2 receiving touchdowns, 4 receiving touchdowns. Last year he almost had 476 yards receiving. Melvin Gordon is the ground and pound. He's the red zone guy. He's the solid runner, and he's really making a name for himself in that receiving game. I just don't see what sort of role Austin Ekeler is going to be able to play in that offense. He's not physical enough, he's not big enough, he's not a pure runner. So can he get it done in the passing game? Well, I don't think the Chargers need him to, so I'm not buying the hype on Austin Ekeler. I think you want to avoid this sleeper for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that he's a role player. I think a lot of times as fantasy owners, we look at players that are successful in limited roles. We think, well, just give more carries, more touches, production will come. But a lot of times guys like him that are undersized with more production, more wear and tear in their body, they're less productive. They're productive in specific situations. Last year it happened with Chris Thompson. He was very productive. A lot of people said he should get the ball more, but the coach is adamant to say, you know, we love this guy. He's got a great role in our offense, but we understand his strengths and weaknesses. He's not going to see an increased role. And then sure enough, later in the year, he gets torn ACL. He's out for the season. So I think Austin Ekeler is a guy like that can be successful in a limited role.
I think a great example of that is Lamar Miller. There's a guy in Miami who people were like, man, if you could just get him the ball more, he could be a fantastic fantasy option. And you know what? Over his career, he has gotten more carries, and his production has dropped. I believe last year he had an all-time low yards per carry. It was, 3.7?
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge sign. There are just certain running backs who can be effective in small doses, but can't in large doses. And I think Austin Ekeler is certainly one of those guys.
Any thoughts there, Ryan?
Realistically, the only thing you mentioned it before is he's got the receptions, and the only way that he's really going to be an effective fantasy running back is in a PPR league. And you got to remember that we're speaking in terms of standard scoring, so we're not talking about PPR. And the only other way is if Melvin Gordon gets injured. But at that rate, I don't think Ekeler can handle the entire load, and they'll probably end up bringing in another guy or pulling somebody up from the practice squad. So it's really a stretch to put him in the sleeper category at this point.
Yeah, especially when you go back to the definition. According to that definition, he has to end up top 10 in running back scoring at the end of the year. That's a huge stretch. So
yeah, exactly.
Not saying he can't be productive and have some good numbers, but so.
Well, let's move on. We can talk about the next guy now. I believe, Rob, you're up.
So I'm going to talk about Mitch Trubiski. Now, before I get into this, I think it's important when we discuss sleepers, I think that we, especially when we do this channel here, we have an obligation not just to mention somebody with an outside shot at being a sleeper, simply by virtue of the fact that they had a bad year, they're being ranked low. If you take enough shots in the dark, eventually you're going to get one right. I think the idea, what we're supposed to be giving you guys is some calculated estimations so that we can say it's not just plausible, but it's realistic to some extent that he could be a sleeper, right? So keep that in mind. So Mitch Trubiski is my fake sleeper. I looked at a lot of sites. I was surprised at how many sites out there had him as a sleeper this year. And I think what's happening is a lot of people look at what happened to Jared Goff his second year and the turnaround that he had, and they think about Mitch Trubiski and they envision a similar thing. First of all, I think there's a big difference between the two quarterbacks. First of all, coming out of college, many experts had Goff rated as a better quarterback. Also, even in the draft, a lot of people felt like Mitch Trubiski going second overall was a little bit high. Two, I think Goff's weapons are just simply better. Robert Woods, Kupp, Sammy Watkins, Todd Gurley, much better running back out of the backfield in terms of receiving the ball in the passing game, if you look at the weapons there. Now, Mitch Trubiski's weapons, they certainly have potential there. Now, you can look at them and you can look at, potentially if the tight end works out and everybody falls into place and if Allen Robinson's healthy, they have potential to be a very good skill position players, but that's almost true of any team in the NFL right now. Realistically, they're not great weapons. His best wide receiver, Allen Robinson's coming off of an ACL surgery. And by the way, I like Allen Robinson, although I think he's probably another year away to really have a great season. His tight end looks very promising. We've talked about him a lot as a sleeper, and I think he's a guy that's got a lot of potential there. But let's be honest, he was brought in and paid on potential. His resume is not that great yet. Now this might be the year that all comes together for him. You look at Jordan Howard, his best running back and probably the best weapon there. Very good running back, by the way. But he led the league and dropped passes with 14 last 2 years. So his best running back doesn't have great hands. Now you have Tariq Cohen, who's a situational play there. Then you got Gabriel, who was brought in, but he's a wide receiver 3. So I think he's got decent weapons there, but I don't think he's got great weapons. I look at Goff, and Goff has much better weapons in LA. That's my opinion. That's what I feel. Another concern I have, if you look at the offensive lines and how they were ranked, okay, the Rams' offensive line was ranked overall better than the Bears across the board statistically. Currently, right now in the preseason, the Bears' offensive line is getting a below-average grade for pass blocking. Okay, so right away, Goff has a huge advantage there in terms of that. I think it's important to remember this, too, that Jared Goff had a huge turnaround last year. He had a great season, but he struggled against good defenses. We broke that down in a few videos. This might be redundant for some of you, but if you didn't watch our other videos, I think you need to have these facts. I'm going to give it to you again. Goff had a great year last year, but against bad defenses, he padded his statistics. In 6 games, he had a total of 17 touchdowns to 0 interceptions. In those games, he had quarterback rating of 118, 146, 147, 125, 112, 118. And those were against teams like Indy, San Francisco, Giants, Houston, and Philly, and Tennessee. 5 or 6 of those teams finished in the bottom third in pass defense. Those defense finished 30th, 25th, 32nd, and 17th in points allowed per game. All 6 of them finished in the bottom third in terms of passing yards allowed. Whereas Goff was much less effective against top defenses. The remaining 9 games, he had an interception to TD ratio of only 11-7. The reason why I say that is Goff came a long way. I think Trubinsky's going to improve, but we have to remember these guys are both young quarterbacks that need time to develop. They're still learning their position. Some people point to Wentz turnaround that he had in his second year, but first of all, Wentz was significantly better his rookie year, and Philadelphia's offensive line actually ranks better than any one of them. In fact, Philadelphia's offensive line currently is being ranked as a top 5 offensive line, and they're being viewed as elite. Now, I've heard some of you out there talk about how Mitch Trubinsky actually improved the final 6 games of the season versus previous 6 games. He played 12 total games, right? But in actuality, his quarterback rating was about exactly the same, first 6 over his next 6. In fact, if you break it down, his touchdown to interception ratio, the first 6 games, he had 4 touchdown passes to only 2 interceptions. His next 6 games, he had 3 touchdown passes to 4 interceptions. He actually regressed in terms of that, okay? Now let's go back to the definition of a sleeper quarterback. According to that definition, it's a player drafted outside the first 5 rounds, outside the first 16 quarterbacks taken, who's going to finish in the top 10. Last year, the 10th scoring quarterback was Drew Brees. So that means Mitch Trubinsky this year, in theory, would have to finish ahead of players like Ben Roethlisberger, Matt Ryan, and Drew Brees, and others that fell into that category. Like, can we honestly say that that's going to happen? Like, I can't feel confident in that. According to Yahoo rankings, now I look at Yahoo rankings, and here's why I'm quoting Yahoo rankings this year, not our own rankings. If I quoted our own rankings, you would just say you have bias, of course. So I wanted to go outside of our own quarterback rankings. According to Yahoo rankings, okay, in order for Trubinsky to crack the top 10, that means that he's going to have to jump quarterbacks out there like Ben Roethlisberger, Rivers, Goff, Stafford, Ryan, Luck, and Derek Carr, who are all ranked outside the top 10. Honestly, can you feel comfortable with that? I don't. Okay, so that's a concern that I have there, that he's going to leapfrog all of them. Do we have any definitive proof, okay, that we could say he's a legit sleeper other than simply the fact that he's rated lower and he had a bad year last year? You might think that I'm crazy. Okay, I love feedback, and even if you disagree, by the way, give us some feedback. We love to hear. But last year, we published a video before the season started. We released it August 31st. It was called Deep Sleepers. Watch it. It's still on our site. Go ahead and watch the video. You can see the date. You know we didn't make this up. In there, we mentioned these guys as sleepers: Goff, Kupp, Galladay, Rex Burkhead, Chris Carson, and Corey Clement. We nailed Goff last year as a sleeper. We were absolutely 100% right. When I use the same analytics and the same breakdown that I do and I compare it, I just simply don't see that with Mitch Trubinsky. I'm sorry, Bears fans. I think he's going to improve this year, but he won't finish top 10. Therefore, I can't call him a sleeper. I just don't see that's realistic. Any thoughts, guys?
I think based off of the criteria, I don't think that he'd be a sleeper, but I mean, there's definitely some positives and some negatives to a guy like that. And we've talked about, Allen Robinson, we've talked about Trey Burton, we've talked about DERRICK Cohen and Matt Nagy and the things he wants to do with that offense, being the new head coach. But just because you have a lot of weapons, all these weapons can do well, and a quarterback can still struggle. The quarterback still has the ball in his hands on basically 100% of the plays, as long as they're not running like some sort of weird trick play. And if he's throwing interceptions, like you mentioned, 2 in the first 6 games, 4 in the next 6 games, that's gonna hurt his value in fantasy and not have any value or any negative value towards these other guys. They're only benefiting from him doing positive things. So realistically, when it comes down to it, you can have great weapons. They can all get their fantasy points, but then when you look at it, the quarterback can still get all those negative points from those interceptions that he's going to throw.
Yeah, I want to make it clear before you speak, Christian. I'm not saying he's not going to improve this year. I think he will definitely make a step and make huge improvements. But once again, I just don't see him that high. But go ahead.
Well, that's the thing. I think he'll make improvements, but he threw 7 touchdowns last year. If he doubles that, he's only going to get 14. The quarterback position is just too stacked. Guys like Alex Smith, Tyrod Taylor, they're not even in the top 12 for us, and some of them aren't even close. Marcus Mariota is another guy. There's just so many talented quarterbacks that aren't going to be in that starting or even on our bench, simply because it's a loaded position where you can be a talented quarterback, but you need a roster around you. And I don't care how good you think Mitchell Trubisky is or will be, he just doesn't have the roster around him. To me, it seems very simple.
All right.
Something to know about Trubisky's first start, actually. Do you know who led the Bears in passing touchdowns that game? DERRICK Cohen.
Sad right there. Well, now we can move on. Ryan, you get to talk about your first guy in a minute.
Tight end O.J. Howard.
Yeah, I know. I just actually realized today that we talked about O.J. Howard in the past, But here's the thing, we got a different perspective on it, and O.J. Howard is being hyped up on every single thing that you could possibly find out there. Everybody thinks this guy is going to be the next big thing, and there are reasons to believe that, but there are also reasons to not believe that currently with the state of the Tampa Bay offense. This guy's a freak, 6'6", 250 pounds. He actually ran a 4.5 140, which is ridiculous. He runs the vertical seams. Actually, he ran a faster 40 than one of these wide receivers I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes, and it's amazing. But at the same time, the negatives, they still do have Cameron Brate. Now, and I mentioned this on my notes. I heard it a couple of days ago in my brain, and I said, it's basically, and I heard it from you, tight end by committee. That's going to be a thing. Sorry, Christian, it's going to be a thing. Tight end by committee. These guys are running 2 tight end sets. They're both out there. Basically, when it comes down to it, last year, O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate were neck and neck when it comes to targets, when it comes to receptions, when it comes to yardage. They both had 6 touchdowns. And when you break it down, I went through every single game by game last year. People say, okay, well, when Ryan Fitzpatrick was on the field, O.J. Howard played better than Cameron Brate. Realistically, O.J. Howard last season had 16 of his 26 receptions in only 4 games. 2 of those games, he had 4 receptions or more. And during those games, Cameron Brate was actually on the field and also had at least 4 or more receptions. So what it comes down to they're splitting the time evenly. During his 6-catch game against Buffalo, right there, he played against Buffalo during that game. Horrible defense last year. Yes, they made the playoffs, but let's be real, it's not a very good defense. Cameron Brate was on the field. He had 4 for 54. His other game that he had 4 was against the Detroit Lions, one of the bottom 3 defenses in fantasy points in terms against the tight end last year. So realistically, in the time that he spent on the field, it was a lot of shared time, just happened to be the person that was open. And when it came down to it, he did get a lot of breakaway plays. He had a lot of 1 for 30 games, 1 for 15, 1 catch for 17 yards. So there was a period there where Fitzpatrick was in, and Howard did have 2 back-to-back 3 for 52 games. But at the same time, we got to remember Cameron Brate was slightly injured during that time. He had a little bit of a lower limb issue. So the thing with Howard and Brate, it's still a Dirk Cutter offense. They're trying to bring in a new running back. Check out that system. The game is going to switch over to a little bit more run heavy. They still have the other weapons with Chris Godwin. They have Deshaun Watson. They have big target and Mike Evans out there. So you're getting Fitzpatrick, or actually, in my opinion, Ryan Griffin for the first 3 games. And then all of a sudden, Winston comes back. First game is against a rough linebacking Bears defense. So he's going to have to go against Smith on the Bears defense. And then the next game's a bye. So it'll take a while for Winston to get back into the system. And I just don't foresee O.J. Howard even cracking the top, 12 we need to be in, or the top 10 for
yeah, according to he has to make top 6.
Top 6, definitely not top 6.
Yeah.
So that's my opinion.
All right.
Yeah, I think it's a solid opinion. We talked about him another day in our risky picks video. The only thing that I think that really bodes well for him, and I think that's a solid pick because tight end's you want to get that right. If you don't get an elite guy, well, then the talent drops off. But the one thing I guess that really bodes well for him is that he was really close to having a historic rookie season. Only 3 rookie tight ends have ever had 500 yards and 5 touchdowns or more. And he had 6 receiving touchdowns. He had 400, and I think it was 474 receiving yards. So he was very close. He was a catch or 2 away from being up there historically with a lot of other guys. But you're right. It's one of those, right now Tampa's a whole committee system. They got quarterback by committee, tight end by committee, running back by committee. We just don't know. The question is, can he find a way to separate himself from Cameron Brate? And I agree with you that it's probably not going to happen this season.
And who knows, when Cameron Brate's contract's up, maybe he moves on somewhere else and they really take their number 1 first-round tight end seriously. But during the time with Cameron Brate still there, it's really hard to say definitively this is the guy.
Yeah. Well, I guess we can talk about, I got my next guy coming up I'm excited about. All right, so Michael Crabtree, here's an interesting pick. I think a lot of people are excited about him. Last year he came out and he was the 29th fantasy wide receiver in standard leagues. He had 8 touchdowns, which was good, and I think a lot of people are excited about him. But I think that there's a lot of bad news. I think they could step up the things. Oh, well, he's going to Baltimore. He's going to be the #1 wide receiver. He's going to get #1 wide receiver targets. Well, there's some bad news. He had 8 touchdowns, which is great, but he only had 600 receiving yards. He dropped 5 passes last year. In fact, he was among the bottom of the NFL with only 57% catch percentage when he's targeted. On top of that, he's going to be 31 years old. He's not young anymore. He's not going to get better. I think he's slowing down. I think you see that. I think that he was a good wide receiver. He was a fairly good option. The 8 touchdowns shows that. But with only 600 receiving yards last year, I think you can tell that he's just a step slower. He reminds me of Anquan Boldin towards the end of his career. A good route runner, but he's not going to go deep for all these crazy plays or anything like that. He's not a huge playmaker. Over the last 5 seasons, to kind of get an idea of what we're getting with him as an average player. Over the last 5 seasons, he's averaged 63 catches, 705 yards, and 6 touchdowns. But there's some bad news, too. It's not just that he's old and that he's been okay and that I don't think he's going to step up because he's old. It's also that he's a huge downgrade. You go from Derek Carr to Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco's been kind of an embarrassment recently. And in fact, he may be playing with a rookie quarterback in Lamar Jackson. The situation's up in the air, and who really knows what could happen? On top of that, you go to a system change. You go from the #2 wideout to the #1 wide receiver. A 31-year-old wide receiver who's kind of slow, not a big playmaker, facing #1 corners does scare me. And then finally, you go from the 25th rushing attack to the 11th. The Ravens run the ball a lot more. They rank 14th overall, better than the Raiders. And their defense, last year the Raiders were the 20th best defense, and the Ravens were the 6th. So you go from a team with a good quarterback who throws the ball a lot because they don't play defense or run the ball well, to a team that has a bad quarterback situation, does play good defense, and does run the ball a lot, and he's an older wide receiver facing #1 cornerbacks. There's a lot to hate here. Like, there's a lot to avoid. I don't want to be harsh on him. I used to like him. I got pretty excited about him when he first went to Oakland. But you have to face the facts that I just don't think that this year is going to be very fantastic for him. There's a lot working against him.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we need to just throw this out there because we're going to get misquoted. I know someone going to say, well, you guys hate Michael Crabtree. I like Michael Crabtree as a wide receiver 3. I wouldn't be that surprised if he ends up with 800 yards, maybe 6-7 touchdowns. But once again, going back to sleeper, the definition of sleeper, this is a guy that even as #1 is not going to finish, what did they say, in the top 12?
Well, that's the thing. I hate him as a sleeper. I don't hate him as a player. Like I said, I liked him when he went to Oakland. I like him as a guy. He seems like a cool guy. But right now his ADP has him taking right on that border as a #3, #2 guy, just below a #2 pick. I believe is like 25 or 26th overall. So I think that's just a bit of a stretch. He's more of a bench wide receiver, maybe a wide receiver 3. But to say that he's going to be a sleeper and somehow crack that into a #2, a #1 wideout is certainly not going to happen. That's a stretch.
Well, and another thing, too, is you mentioned how he's going to be facing #1 corners. I mean, realistically, you can triple cover Michael Crabtree because all you have on the other side is John Brown and his 1.5 good hamstrings, and Willie Snead, who really hasn't done much in 2 years now, and Brashad Perriman, who I don't even know how he's still on the team. He hasn't played a game, really. So there's nobody else. You could triple cover Michael Crabtree and still be totally fine on the other side of the defense.
Yeah, especially with that only 57% catch percentage is just another thing that scares me about him. You got to catch the ball a lot if you want to get the ball thrown to you a lot, if you want to get the end zone off, if you want good fantasy numbers. So that's another thing that scares me a lot.
All right. Let's move on to our next. So Derrick Henry, now I'm going to talk about him as a fake sleeper, and I'm going to share stats that I have shared in other videos, but here's the thing, this guy's still trending upwards. There's still a lot of sites and people seeing him as a sleeper, and I don't get that, so we're going to continue beating a dead horse statistically because I think there's some things you people need to understand out there that we're concerned about. Let's go back to the definition. Once again, can Derrick Henry be a sleeper? Well, that definition, according to not us, but according to the most reputable, the largest fantasy site out there in YouTube, is a player drafted outside the first 5 rounds and 24 running backs taken in 12-team drafts that can finish in finish as a top 12 running back. Okay. Well, his current average draft position is a 17th running back taken in the 4th round. So by that virtue alone, he's already disqualified as a sleeper. So right away, but we'll go further. Okay. Not only is he not qualified in terms of where he's being taken currently in the definition, but I'll give you some other reasons why I have a concern that he's not a sleeper. He's a big back, obviously 6'3", 247 pounds, and many people think this is his breakout year. But I want to take a look at the numbers once again. Put the emotions aside, put the feelings aside. We say it in fantasy football, the biggest mistake that you make is you got to put your feelings aside and look at the numbers. So last year he had a decent year, 744 rushing yards and 5 TDs. Okay, although he had 2 less catches in the receiving game, although he played 1 more game, that's a little bit concerning. We'll get to that in a bit. Now, last year had a slight drop in production. His rookie year, his yards per carry 4.5. Last year went down to 4.2. That seems insignificant, but if you dive deeper, I think there's greater cause for concern. Last year, he had 2 touchdowns, one that was 72 yards and one that was 75. Okay, both of those situations was kind of a fluke. It was late in the game. He was called to basically pound the ball between the tackles, run the clock out. He happened to break through a line of scrimmage that was loaded with a 9-man, 10-man box, right? He goes the distance, so he gets a 72-yard run, a 75-yard run. Typically, he's not going to see that. He's not very sound. He's a big physical pounder. You take away those 2 runs, right? That leaves him with 174 carries, 597 yards for a woeful yards per carry of 3.43. That's a really low yards per carry, 3.43. Let me say that again. He struggled to run the ball a lot last year. In 8 games, he disappeared and was brutal. In 8 games, he had a total of 170 yards on 82 carries for yards per carry, 2.07. Now, I know they make some changes in the offseason. They bring some guys in, but the bottom line is I have some concerns there. But for me, the biggest red flag why I don't see him as being a sleeper that's going to break into the top 12, the sign of Dion Lewis. And it really begs the question. Now, last year, for whatever reason, Derrick Henry looked like the better running back, okay, compared to DeMarco Murray. He looked quicker, faster, more elusive, more physical. And yet, for whatever reason, the Titans just seemed hesitant to go to Murray. And I'm sorry, not to go to Murray, to go to Derrick Henry. And then in the offseason, they signed Dion Lewis for $5 million per year. And so it makes you wonder why they aggressively pursued him. And I think what it comes down to Derrick Henry's ineffectiveness in the passing game. I'll give you some stats right now. Coach LaFleur talked about his desire to build a strong marriage between the run and the pass. He sees a team using a ground game to set up defenses for play action down the field. LaFleur implemented this with the Rams last season. Now, if we look back to how he worked with the Rams, how their play calling was and what they did, okay, the Rams' backs were used a lot in the passing game. Now, play action only works if teams are buying into it. And that was a problem with Adrian Peterson for years, as everybody knew that he was in there. Realistically, he wasn't going to be using the passing game, and so teams could load the box. So when a guy's on the field, play action only works if defenses are buying into it. And Derrick Henry's only averaged 12 catches last 2 years. He's not a legitimate threat in the passing game. In fact, last year, he only played 41% of Tennessee snaps. That ranked him 46 among NFL backs. His lack of ability to receive the ball in the backfield is hindering how much time he's seen on the field. I think that's primarily why they brought Dion Lewis in. I'm not going to get too much into the statistics at this point. You can go into some of our other videos. But the bottom line is Derrick Henry, I see him as maybe a running back 3 in standard leagues, much lower in PPR leagues. The only way that I could see him become a sleeper and moving into the top 12 is if Dion Lewis gets hurt and you're not playing in a PPR league. Once again, those are some of the concerns that we have. So,
yeah, I think another thing that really compounds the concerns with Derrick Henry is how the Patriots used him last year. I don't know if you mentioned it. I was kind of reading my notes here for a second, but they used Dion Lewis a ton in the red zone. I think some people think that, well, Dion Lewis may be a third down back, but Derrick Henry, he's getting the goal line carries. He's getting a lot of the runs, and he's going to get a lot of touchdowns, and I really don't think that's the case. When you're in the goal line, do you want to have a guy who can only run, or do you want to have a guy who can run it and catch it? That really opens the field up, especially for a quarterback. When you get in the red zone, quarterbacks struggle, and you need to put your best weapons out there to help your quarterback be able to throw it, to open up the field. If you can't throw it in the red zone, then you can't run it because teams are going to, like you say with Peterson, put the 8-man box in. So I definitely see the Tennessee Titans this year using Dion Lewis a lot in the red zone, which is a big concern.
And I mentioned it in another video too. Dion Lewis's effectiveness in the red zone. He had 40 touches in the red zone last season. All 9 of his touchdowns were scored in the red zone. 6 for 6 on targets caught for 3 of his touchdowns, and 6 rushing touchdowns. He had 34 rushing attempts for 136 yards, which averages 4 yards per carry in the red zone. So he's very effective, and almost 25% of his touches scoring a touchdown. That they're going to want to use him down there. I understand Derrick Henry's big and he's a bruiser and he can pound it, but if he's not getting the yardage needed, then they'll go to the other guy, or they might just say, hey, Dion Lewis can do it. Let's put him in.
Yeah, I'm going to put it in the description because I want to check, but I saw something today and I want to make sure I get the exact percentage right. But I think Dion Lewis had like one of the best catching percentages in the NFL. I believe it was 94% catch percentage. Like how effective he was in his time in the passing game was like scary high. So I think that that's another thing that bodes really well for him.
It's crazy. They said that James White was the receptions and the hands guys in New England last year.
Keenum.
Case Keenum, absolutely. A lot of people are hyped on Case Keenum last year, and especially this year, because, John Elway looked at this guy and said, hey, I need to sign him in the offseason. But let's take a look at John Elway's other options. He brought in Peyton Manning, big name towards the end of his career. Peyton Manning had an excellent time there, won him a Super Bowl. But then what did he do? He had Brock Osweiler. He drafted Trevor Siemian, who is no longer with the team, and drafted Paxton Lynch, who was supposed to be their next future franchise quarterback. So, what happens? Brock Osweiler leaves, goes to Houston, shipped him off out of Houston because he didn't do well, went to Cleveland, didn't do anything for Cleveland, spent about as much time as a cup of coffee in Cleveland, and ended up back in Denver again. Why would John Elway bring this guy back? And now you're bringing in Case Keenum, who had one decent season. And now I say decent because, yeah, he was efficient for the Vikings. He had career numbers as far as completions, completion percentage, passing yards, games started, passing touchdowns. His lowest interception total of his career, other than the season where he only played half of it. But realistically, the other thing too is Case Keenum was second last year in quarterback rating, 98 for his quarterback rating. But he still only finished as the number 14 fantasy quarterback with 237.9 points. Now you look at it and they're saying, well, Denver's defense is great. He should be able to play with a good defense just like he did last year in Minnesota. We have a rookie running back, and we have a decent running back core. We have these two solid, established wide receivers. But if you really break it down, the two solid, established wide receivers are both on the wrong end of 30. They're trying to bring in a brand new rookie, and eventually I think Sutton and, I can't think of his name right now, Henderson, I believe it are going to be the next two to come in and take over within the next year. Definitely in 2 years, Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders are going to be out the door. Keenum, he doesn't really have much in the backfield as far as passing goes. I know they're trying to get Booker and Royce Freeman out there, but Royce Freeman's still a rookie. He didn't do well as far as receiving in college. Booker's been injured so much. Who knows how long he's going to stay on the field. And who do they even have at tight end? They gave up Virgil Green, who only had a career 49 catches in about 64 games, I believe it was. They gave that guy up to bring in next to nothing. So he doesn't have very many weapons. People are saying that he's going to be a sleeper. And when you look at it, at the end of the day, he could have another season like he did last year and break career averages and still not break the top 10 as far as fantasy points go.
Yeah, Case Keenum did great. Obviously, I'm a Vikings fan. I love what he did for us last year. I hope he has a good career. I do. I hope he does well out there in Denver. But honestly, I think that offensive coordinator Sherman is really a quarterback guru. He's done wonders, not just with Case Keenum, but other quarterbacks in his past. You look what he did for Nick Foles back that year. That he had 27 touchdown passes to only 2 interceptions. I think a lot of his production came with the right situation and the right offensive coordinator. I've got my concerns. I'm not saying he won't have a decent year, but I definitely see him finishing outside the top 15 in scoring for sure.
He had 22 touchdowns, 7 interceptions last year. He was pretty efficient.
Yeah, that's the thing. When he first went to Denver, I thought, that's exciting. He's got some good weapons, Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders. But then I thought, that's actually a pretty solid downgrade. I don't mean to insult Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, but you compare that to Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs, you could easily argue those two guys are better, not to mention that Kyle Rudolph is a good tight end, far better than any tight end that Denver has. And Jerick McKinnon out of the backfield last year was extremely effective. He surprised me how effective he was out of the backfield. So I think you really miss a lot. It's not just throwing your wide receivers. You need other guys to check down, to make plays, to do things. And he's just simply not going to have that.
All right. Christian, let's get to your last guy here then. You're up.
All right, so tight end Mike Gesicki. I think a lot of people are really excited about him. Reports he's so athletic, he's so good. The Dolphins are bragging about him. But let's just talk about it. What would you consider a good fantasy season for a tight end? What are you expecting from him? If you're calling him a sleeper, he has to at least finish in the top 12 for me, for you to justifiably say that he was a good sleeper that year. So let's talk about it. What would he have to do? to be in the top 12? Well, last year, 18 tight ends had 500 yards, and 12 tight ends had 5 touchdowns. So to get in the top 12, he's going to have 500 yards at least and 5 touchdowns. Well, as I touched on earlier with O.J. Howard, only 3 rookie tight ends have ever had 500 yards and 5 touchdowns or more. He would have to be historically good to do that. That, for me, automatically cuts him out of the top 12. I don't think he's going to do that. His quarterback situation is okay with Ryan Tannehill, but Ryan Tannehill hasn't played since getting hurt week 13 of the 2016 season, and I think that's seriously going to hurt his quarterback play for a while as he gets back into it. It concerns me that I think Mike Gesicki is going to could possibly be the 6th option on that team. Options like Devontae Parker, Kenny Stills, Danny Amendola, Albert Wilson, Kenyon Drake. There are plenty of guys to throw the ball to. It's not like Ryan Tannehill doesn't have anyone. None of those options are absolutely fantastic or amazing, but they're solid options. They're workable. Other things that concern me is he's a 6'4", 6'inch tall tight end who's a poor blocker. He's a large tight end, and they're kind of disappointed with. He's been very ineffective blocking and struggles. And I think that's part of the reason rookie tight ends always struggle is because you have to be able to do that tight end. If you're going to go out there and play at that position, you have to be effective. So that could certainly keep him off the field a lot. But perhaps my biggest concern was at the NFL Combine. They do all this stuff. They talk about how fast you are, how you can jump, how you look, like how many balls did you catch, all these different things. And then they compare you to a player. And you know who he got compared to? Eric Ebron. That's not the tight end you really want to be compared to. A guy who averages 2.75 touchdowns a season. If he turns out to be Eric Ebron, a lot of fantasy owners are going to be seriously disappointed. So I guess just in recap, you really expect him to have a historic tight end season? No, that alone keeps him out of it. Despite the fact that there are other weapons there, he's a poor blocker, and to be honest, I don't know if he's going to be quite the tight end that the Dolphins are bragging him up to be.
All right, Ron, any thoughts?
No, that's good analysis. I've looked into Mike Gesicki quite a bit, and I agree. I don't think there's any possibility he makes the qualifications for a sleeper.
Hopefully he doesn't watch this video, though. He'll be mad.
That's okay. He's not going to find us where we are.
I'm going to get to Blake Bortles. I know right now, and I know who you are specifically. There's one guy out there. I love you, man. I love your comments, but you're going to hate me for this. But I got to say it. Blake Bortles, to me, is not a sleeper. Okay, I know you're going to give me pushback on that, and that's okay. No, he's had 1 year that he was a good fantasy option. That was back in 2015. He finished that year at 35 touchdown passes. But if you look back at that year, what you realize, he padded a lot of those stats late in games. It was in the fourth quarter that he scored a lot of his yards and his touchdowns. Many of his stats were in garbage time situations where defenses played soft zones or prevent defenses. That year, okay, playing from behind. He accumulated 3,428 passing yards and 29 touchdown passes while the Jags were playing from behind. That's almost his entire numbers right there. In fact, that only leaves 6 touchdowns that he threw while not playing from behind. He padded those stats in ideal situations. They finished that year 5-11. They finished second to last in defense, allowing 28 points per game. Okay, that's not going to be the case this year. Last year, the Jags were second in the NFL. They only allowed 16.8 points on defense. So obviously that's a totally different situation. Now, Blake took a step back the last 2 years. Now, some people point to a late season surge to say, okay, they think he's going to rebound this year, but I think you need to consider that. He did have a 4-game stretch. At the end of the year, he did well. He threw 9 touchdown passes and only 3 interceptions, and he averaged 325 passing yards during those 4 games. That's impressive, but I talked about this before, but when you break that down a little bit deeper, here's what you know about that 4-game stretch. It was against Indy, who ranked 30th in points allowed, defense, allowing 25.3 points per game. They were 28th in passing yards allowed. It did it against Seattle. Now, Seattle was a decent defense last year, but when the Jags played them, they had been struggling quite a bit on defense. In fact, during that game, Cam Chancellor and Richard Sherman missed the game. So those are huge defenders back there that are out of there. It was against Houston, who was last in the league on defense, allowing 27.3 points per game. It was against San Francisco, who was 25th in points allowed on defense. So those stats are a bit deceiving. Even with those games to pad his stats, he still only finished with 21 touchdown passes. That's not that good. Here's the other reason why I have a concern. His weapons are far from proven. Now, a lot of his wide receivers have potential. There's a few guys there that could develop and become very good wide receivers in the NFL, but right now, none of them are proven, and all of them are ranked outside the top 50 in wide receiver rankings in most sites. That team is going to win this way, playing defense and running the ball with Leonard Fournette. In fact, I'll tell you what, you want to know how people view Blake Bortles, take a look at how other defenses view them. Last year, Leonard Fournette led the NFL. He faced the most stacked boxes. 49% of his carries were against a stacked box. Why? Because defensive coordinators understood that you're going to shut down the run. You're not worried. You want Blake Bortles to try to beat you. I think that's going to be the same this year. So in order for Blake to be a sleeper, to end up in the top 10, that means the defense has failed, the running game is ineffective, and some of his unproven weapons become legitimate all-pros, and he has to finish ahead of some very, very good proven quarterbacks out there. I just don't see it happening. Please don't take it personal, Jags fans. I think he's going to be all right. He's going to be asked to win games and be a game manager. I just don't see him as a sleeper. That's my take.
Well, I think that's solid analysis. Losing Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns is a huge hit. Talk about, I think that Keelan Cole might come out to be a very, very good wide receiver and have a fantastic career and be an awesome fantasy option. But I don't care which receiver you're talking about. Even Antonio Brown didn't just burst onto the scene to be some fantastic wide receiver. It takes time. You have to develop. And so I think even if it just is the first half of the season where his receivers struggle, that he's definitely going to struggle a lot because of that. Even if it's just half the year, it could be more.
Well, I know you guys know my thoughts on Marquise Lee. I have him ranked pretty high. He's one of the guys that I really enjoy. And you mentioned Antonio Brown. Actually, Marquise Lee last season had a 6-game stretch where he was in, that multiple receptions a game, multiple yards, 70. They're arbitrary numbers, but I think it was 4 or 5 catches a game, 70 yards a game, and he had a 5 or 6 game stretch where he had hit those numbers consistently. And then, like you said, Bortles played some defenses where he could pad his stats, and during that time, the offense kind of disappeared a little bit. But on top of that, I do believe in Keelan Cole. I believe that he's going to be one of the guys that really pops out as far as that. You mentioned Allen Hurns and Allen Robinson. Now, Rob, you came up with those stats from 2015. 2015 was the year that Allen Hurns and Allen Robinson really blew up, and they both had 1,000-yard seasons and double-digit touchdowns. But that was also the year that you just mentioned where they were coming from behind and all of it was garbage time. So I wonder how much, now it just popped into my brain, how much of that Allen Hurns and Allen Robinson hype came from the fact that they were constantly behind and it was all junk time because they didn't have those types of seasons after that.
Well, I'd say, we'll have to talk about that actually in our wide receiver video because it's certainly something to consider.
Yeah.
Let's get to our final guy here. Jamison Crowder.
Jamison Crowder, yeah. Jamison Crowder, 5'9", 177 pounds. He's not a very big wide receiver by any means. A lot of people are hyping him up, saying, okay, well, Terrell Pryor's gone. Pierre Garçon was there for the first 2 seasons of Crowder's career. Now he's gone. It's his turn. Obviously Josh Doxson's there. They really talk him up. They're hyping him up. He's a highly rated wide receiver. They bring in Paul Richardson. He's going to be there to stretch the field as well. So that's 3 pretty average wide receivers for an Alex Smith offense. Alex Smith is a very smart quarterback. He doesn't like to make mistakes. He doesn't throw the ball up in there for a jump ball. He likes to see some separation. And the separation where it comes from, I believe, on this team is going to be Paul Richardson. If you look at last season, Jamison Crowder had 66 catches for 789 yards and only 3 touchdowns. Now, Paul Richardson had 44 catches for 708 and I believe it was 6 touchdowns with the Seattle Seahawks. And, Doxson is another one of those big guys. He really came on strong towards the end of the season. But then if you look at it, too, they got Chris Thompson's coming back. He's going to be coming out of the backfield. I really, really, really like Darius Geist this year. He's absolutely an amazing back, and I think he is an actual sleeper. And then if you have Jordan Reed on the field, if that guy stays healthy, Jordan Reed could be definitely a top 5 fantasy tight end. So there's just too many mouths to feed, and Alex Smith likes to funnel the ball to specifically 1 or 2 receivers. And if you look at his time in Kansas City especially, he funneled it to Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill was getting separation. Travis Kelce was the tight end. And if you look at his time in San Francisco, he had a good rapport, a good relationship with Vernon Davis. Vernon Davis is the backup, so Jordan Reed's not on the field. Maybe he looks for Vernon Davis. So I just don't foresee there being a lot of targets available with all the weapons. I don't foresee there being a solid amount of yardage, and I don't know that he's necessarily the fastest. And like I mentioned before, he's actually slower in the 40-yard dash than O.J. Howard, 6'6", 250. O.J. Howard ran a 4.51, and Jamison Crowder only ran a 4.56.
Perfect. So it sounds like a good breakdown. Thanks once again for joining us at the Fastball Profits. Love to hear your comments. Like our video, subscribe. We'll see you guys soon. God bless.